Hey guys, welcome back to Community Starcraft 2. I'm your host Magnet, like as usual, and today we're going to be taking a look at some TvZ unit compositions in Micro. As you can see on the screen there, we're going to be looking at three different ones like we usually do in these videos, which is Biomine, the Bio-Thor Hellbat that's gotten a lot popular over the last few months, and finally Mech. We're going to be running them against the most common compositions you're going to see in TvZ, kind of show you little micro things that you can pay attention to throughout your own fights. So like we've done in the past, we'll just jump into the unit test map so we can see everything that's going on, and I'll just kind of simulate some of these battles. And like was listed on there, the first thing we're going to be taking a look at is the Biomine composition, which has been standard for quite a long time throughout Heart of the Swarm. It's not as common anymore, but you will still see it every once in a while. And I feel like this is one of those things that's going to kind of shift back and forth in terms of popularity throughout this matchup. So we'll just grab all the normal upgrades that we would in most of these fights. We'll just grab like 1-1, Stim, Marine Shield, stuff like that, and show you guys the things that you're going to need in these battles, since you usually have those things yourself. So let's say this is kind of more of a mid-game fight. These aren't the biggest armies ever, but what you want to do is burrow your mines like you can see here, kind of spread them out a little bit, and you'll notice I'm putting the Marauders kind of in front of the mines a little bit, or at least on the first layer. And then the Marines are very spread out, because the Marines are the key to keeping this attack going for quite a long time. So they're the most precious unit among this entire composition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys that you'll need to stim up a small group of Marines, kind of kite them back just a little bit while the Zerg approaches, and you want to bait him over the top of your mine so that he eats all the mine damage. You can see those are great mine hits because they were both hitting Banelings and Mutalisks at the same time. And if you can get rid of everything on the ground and there's only Mutalisks that you have to worry about, the Marines should be able to plow through that pretty easily. So that's ideally what you want in most of these fights. Now you might run into Roach Hydra every once in a while, but to be honest it's not that great of a composition against Biomine. So what you want to do with Biomine this time, I'm just going to grab some upgrades to make these somewhat reasonable fights. So when they attack in, obviously you already have the mines burrowed just like before. I have a lot more Marauders in this composition because they're going to be a lot better against Roaches especially. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of kite back just a little bit, make them chase me. I can outrange them just barely, and make them walk all over the mines once they get all clumped up. And then after this, once you get rid of the Roaches and there's just a few Hydralisks left, your Medevac should be able to heal through most of that damage, assuming you still have a respectable army on the field. So then of course you can start chasing them down, make sure they can't run away or anything like that. But that one's pretty straightforward. Both those scenarios are pretty similar. The only difference was just that you want more Marauders if they are running Roaches at any time. Finally, let's take a look at something like Ultralisks, which we're going to assume this is a late game composition, so both sides are fully upgraded by this point. And you'll notice that I have a lot of Marauders once again, not a ton of Marines, because the Marauders are going to be doing most of the work. The other thing that I've changed, especially for this later game scenario against Ultralisks, is you need a lot more mines as well, because the mines do a lot of damage to Ultras. The idea here is that you want a lot of big damage dealers against the Ultralisks. I'm just going to heal this last one up really quick. But you want a lot of big damage dealers so that the Ultralisk armor can be kind of nullified a little bit. The Marines will barely do any damage. So once again, you want to try and bait them over the mines the best you can. Unfortunately, sometimes the Zerglings will eat up a lot of the mine shots. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to micro my units back into different random territories where the Ultras kind of start to clump up and can't get through there very well. So if I start kind of microing through these buildings a little bit, you can see how ineffective the Ultras are. And you want to set up your own buildings back at home so you have little refuges like that to micro back to, or you can use other parts of the map to do that as well. So now let's take a look at the Bio-Thor Hellbat composition, which again has been gaining a lot more popularity over the last few months. And to be honest, it's a lot easier to control than Biomine overall, just because the units are based on positioning here, and they're based upon kind of doing their job on that position. So what I have here is I have quite a few Hellbats. You can see I've like 14 or so, I think is the number here, I'm not quite sure, but a lot of Hellbats here, and the purpose is to tank the Banelings and the Zerglings so that the Marines can stay alive. And once again, the Marines are the most important thing to keep alive here. So positioning is what this army is completely about. You want to layer it so that the Hellbats take a lot of the damage, and then the Thor takes a lot of the damage afterwards. So if you need to, you can micro your Marines back away from the Banelings if they have any, but a lot of times your Hellbats will absorb most of it, as we saw there. And then you'll notice I did grab my Thor for just a second, try to target on the clump of Mutas the best I could. And then once again, Marines versus Mutas, the Marines will win pretty much every time. So it's exactly how you want that to break down. Pretty standard. Now this time we're fighting the Roach Hydra composition once again. And you can see that I have splashed in some Marauders there. My Thor count is a little higher as well. My Hellbat count is lower. So when they attack in here, there's really not a whole lot to do. Just stim your army and let everything do its job here. One thing that I could have done better as I watched this battle is I should have actually microed my bio back behind the Thors so the Thors could take some of the damage. You see that I do realize that I should have been doing this earlier. And then you can do cute things like loading Thors into medevacs to try and keep them alive for a little bit longer. But the longer you can keep your bio alive, the better you're going to do there. So if you're fighting kind of the last remnants of them, just micro your bio back behind your Thors. And then finally, once again, we're going to be taking a look at the battle against the Ultralisks. And you will note that I only have a few Hellbats. I'm going to grab Blue Flame here, which you should have by this point in the game anyway. And then I have no Marines. It's only Marauders and a lot of Thors here. What I'm going to do with the Marauders is I'm going to kite up here. I'm going to try and lead the Zerglings into the Hellbats. And then the Marauders are going to get behind the Thors like we were talking about before. Let the Thors deal as much damage and take as much damage as possible. And another thing I should have really cleaned up on here is if you're microing these groups of Marauders the entire time is you want to try and shoot down the weakest Ultralisk possible. And if you're down to just this many units, you can always just kite back and shoot the Ultralisk and then kite back a little more and shoot the Ultralisk again. Which is pretty normal micro there. So you want to think about what's taking damage and what can I do most cost effectively with the small groups of units I'm controlling at a time. So lastly, we're going to take a look at mech. Now mech is a very unique composition in the sense that it's completely based around positioning once again. So we're just going to assume that you have good positioning in pretty much every one of these fights. It's forcing the Zerg to attack into you. So again, Roach Hydra, we're going to have that as a composition coming down first. There's not a whole lot you need to do here. One thing you could do is you could micro your Hellbats back just a little bit, but I'm going to demonstrate that even with a gigantic surround, which I'm getting right now on these Zerg units, if you just have enough tanks and you can buffer enough with your Hellbats, you really shouldn't have any problems. So I'll just spread these guys out. I'll just kind of run in there, and there's not even a lot I have to do as the mech player. Just demonstrating that if you get the position and you force them to attack into you, there's really not a lot you have to do during the fight. The mech should be able to just steamroll it pretty easily. I'm just making sure my Hellbats are kind of spread out a little bit so they can tank on all sides so my tanks aren't taking any damage. And yeah, you can see that it really just doesn't even matter. The tanks just blow everything up, no problem. So positioning is what mech's all about. Now we're going to take a look at the Mutalisk response, which is somewhat common to mech right now. They just try to make enough mutas to finally push it all over and be able to kill the tanks and Hellbats. So notice I have a lot less tanks, a lot less Hellbats. I've started mixing some Thors and Mines in this composition as well. I'm going to spread my Thors out as well, the best I can, to try and get the Mutalisk to clump up as much as possible when they're targeting one of them. So Zerglings should come in here. The tanks should make really short work of that. The Thors, you want to try and target them the best you can on the Mutalisk. So just select your Thors and shoot at the middle of the clump if you can. Try and deal as much splash damage as possible. And these fights could linger on quite a bit. You could do some cute medevac micro with your Thor and stuff, but most of the time it's really just not that worth it. And you can see as the Mutalisks start to clump up once again, the Thors just do enormous damage, and eventually you'll be able to wear it out. So not too much left to see in that.
I like it.
Now we're going to talk about if they go for something like Broodlords. So they have a lot of Broodlords and a lot of Corruptors, and you'll notice my composition, ideally, is just tons of Vikings, about 5 Thors, and just a few Ravens. And this is super deep late game, I'm assuming, as well. You may get into a lot different situations, so I'm just showing an ideal composition. This is not what you're always going to get. So what I'm going to do is I'm just throwing those down preemptively. Those are point defense drones. And what they're going to do is they're going to absorb some Corruptor shots. And while the Corruptors clump up, you want to target your Thors on the middle of the clump the best you can. So that the Corruptors are doing basically no damage this entire time. The Thors are dealing all kinds of splash. Once your point defense drones run out and once your Thors start to die, you can start just blocking them away from the Broodlings for as long as you possibly can just to keep them alive. And the Vikings should be able to clean up the rest once the Corruptors are dead. So the whole idea there was just trying to splash on top of the Corruptors with your Thors, and then let the Vikings kill the rest. And there's one Hydra accidentally mixed in there, but oh well. And then lastly, sometimes you'll have to deal with things like Swarm Hosts. So the composition here is a lot of tanks, a decent number of Vikings, and most importantly a lot of Ravens here. What we're going to be doing is putting down point defense drones to prevent the Locusts from firing. Once you get a wave of Locusts dealt with, you can start to move up just a little bit and then re-siege, so that by the time the Locusts pop back out, you already have your point defense drones and your tanks ready to go once again. And ideally, your tanks should take no shots from the Locust if you're doing this right. You can see me kind of mess up my micro right here. I'm trying to shift queue the tank command so that they'll walk forward and then siege, but I accidentally did not hold shift during that. But re-sieging, once I notice a locust coming out, I have plenty of point defense drone energy, and the locusts just kind of evaporate immediately. And then there's going to be a point where if you keep doing this and they run out of real estate, that you're going to be able to just go in there and start engaging. Again, point defense drones being laid down all over the place. And if you're on top of his swarm host, there's not much reason to siege here. Just keep your tanks unsieged. The point defense drones are doing basically all the work here, not allowing locusts to fire really at all. So the tanks can just walk in there, and if you can get engagements like this against swarm hosts, you will easily kill them. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed that. Other than that, I think the only composition video that's left for Terran is just in TvT, and that's going to be a little strange, but you should see that coming up in here in the next few days. In the meantime, though, check out our sponsor, which is sc2replaystats.com. They have really cool tools to automatically upload your replays to their site, and they'll do a lot of analysis on them and stuff. So look at that. Really cool utility to have for analyzing your replays. But I'll be back with those videos very soon, and I'll see you guys then.